I want to bring in now Josh Skule. He's a former executive assistant director for intelligence at the FBI, and he's the CEO of Bowwave LLC, a national security firm. Thank you for being here with us today. This news, as we have mentioned, is in some ways not a surprise. It is, however, breaking news, and it was far from certain. What is your initial response at hearing that Chris Wray has decided to resign?
I'm more surprised at the timing than anything else. I mean, Director Wray has been very resilient in his position, very fair, very non-political, in my opinion. But it is not uncommon for presidential appointees to submit their resignation.
So, Josh, now the question becomes something about Wray's legacy. As you said, in your experience, having worked at the FBI, you felt that he was very fair and non-political. However, as you just heard from Scott McFarlane, lawmakers and many of the American public don't feel like the FBI has been free from political influences. What do you think Wray's legacy will be?
Basically what I just said. I think that he followed the rule of the law. He followed the ethos of the FBI, which is to uphold the Constitution and protect the American people. I think, unfortunately, in today's environment, both sides of the aisle, when there is charges against somebody that is in politics, waves a flag of political persecution. The stats I looked at not that long ago actually had more Democrats than Republicans charged under this administration. And let's keep in mind that the FBI does investigations. They do not bring charges. They cannot execute search warrants without seeing a judge. And so while there has been a lot of rhetoric and it seems to be vogue these days, it's really not palatable and it's not good for the safety of our country.
And what then is your thoughts about Kash Patel taking over as head of the FBI?
Well, I think he's going to have to answer a lot of hard questions during his confirmation hearing. He has made a lot of audacious statements, but I'm sure he is prepared to answer those in public.
I'm wondering, Josh, if you could give us some sense, given your experience working there at the FBI, what this announcement today, what the changeover potentially to Patel will mean for the rest of the rank and file at the FBI. Do you expect to see more resignations ahead of Trump's next term?
So I think there will be some media that makes something of people retiring from the FBI. Generally, the senior folks, it takes approximately 20 years to reach a very senior level, maybe a little bit more in the FBI. And some of those folks may be transitioning out during this time period as going into the private sector. And I think that some of that will be made of because of a new changeover in administration. I don't expect there to be a mass exodus from the FBI. The FBI has been around for over 100 years. It has gone through a lot of ups and downs and turmoil. And so I expect the people of the FBI, its executives, to carry the mission forward. And I think we'll see that going into this next administration.
All right. Josh Skule, thank you.
Thank you.
I want to bring in now CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett. Major, this news means that in both of the beginnings of the Trump administration, he is starting with a new director of the FBI, even though Chris Wray was the guy that he had tapped to replace James Comey. Yep. What are your top line thoughts?
Well, first of all, the country, I think, should pause because Congress set up the 10-year term for the FBI director for a reason, to at least partially insulate the FBI and the person leading the FBI, whoever that might be, from the vicissitudes or the sways of partisan politics. And that's not what's happening here. Chris Wray, as Scott McFarlane said just a few moments ago, has until 2027 under that 10-year service allotment to be FBI director. He's stepping down because he knows the incoming president has already identified his replacement. Chris Wray doesn't have to go. He could wait this out and force President Trump, upon taking the oath of office, to fire him and explain to the American public why he's firing the FBI director. Chris Wray has decided to take the more politically accommodating choice of doing that work for the incoming president, meaning he is taking political signals from an election. That's precisely what Congress wanted the FBI director not to do. So I think we should pause on that for a moment. And to this larger question, Lana, about politics in the FBI, please, let's not kid ourselves. Under J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI became an incredibly powerful institution. Why? Because J. Edgar Hoover made sure to have as much information on everyone in politics, including the President of the United States, and use it in political ways to the FBI's aggregated benefit. There's a long history that anyone can read books about this, do any quick internet searches. The FBI has tried since the J. Edgar Hoover era to try to be less obviously political. And as our previous guest just mentioned, it does lots of investigations and only executes search warrants. Let's talk about the one that is in the Trump world is most objectionable, the search warrants executed at Mar-a-Lago. Those didn't happen because the FBI invented the idea of executing a search warrant at Mar-a-Lago. The Justice Department tried to negotiate with former President Trump over the documents there, couldn't get it resolved, spent months and months trying to do that, went before a judge. A judge said, yes, this is a problem. It possibly violates the law. Here's a search warrant. FBI, go execute it. The FBI did nothing on its own in that case, yet it became vilified within the Trump world for doing what a judge instructed the FBI to do in consultation with the law and the Justice Department. So accusations of politicized FBI don't necessarily mean it is, but have become part of the characterization of the FBI and certainly of Christopher Wray, even though, as you accurately said, he was once ago President Trump's choice to lead the Bureau. No longer.
Major, I'm so glad that you brought the FBI back to its historical foundation with J. Edgar Hoover, because the building, the legacy of Hoover lives on in many ways, and the idea that it was always free and above board from politics doesn't reconcile itself with what we know to be historically true.
Right.
But that said, there was a long period after Hoover's very long term in heading up the FBI, in which we saw an FBI that felt less political.
Right.
How did that transition happen?
Where FBI directors tried to say, we're not J. Edgar Hoover.
Right.
We're not going to be that bad old thing that the FBI became. We'll take all the power that the FBI accumulated under J. Edgar Hoover's watch, but we're not going to be as muscular. We're not going to have as many sharp elbows. We're not going to warn people about all the things we know about them and try to intimidate them in the way Hoover did.
And now we're looking at Kash Patel potentially taking on the head of this agency that has the potential to not only have so much influence, but also to wield that power in ways that may not be for the best benefit of people in this country. What has Patel said about how he wants to run the agency?
So Kash Patel has said that lots of people should be prosecuted, people who said things that were condemning of or highly critical of former President Trump. There's a very long list. You can look it up online. Members of Congress, former members of the military, some in the media, et cetera. He's going to be asked about that. He's going to have to answer as to whether or not, if he is confirmed to run the FBI, he would actually turn the FBI's vast power in that investigatory direction. Kash Patel, however, and this is important, is also an interesting figure in the Crossfire Hurricane investigation about potential Russian collusion between candidate Trump and Russia in the 2016 election. He was working for the House Intelligence Committee for Devin Nunes and basically unearthed information that made it clear that some of the FBI tactics in that investigation violated FBI procedures and norms and might have violated the law. Those things were denounced as fanciful when Kash Patel first brought them to the surface under the aegis of the head of the Intelligence Committee on the House side, Devin Nunes. They were then vindicated by a thorough investigation of the Inspector General into some of those FBI tactics, specifically related to warrants on a couple of members of the incoming Trump administration. Kash Patel was vindicated, and I guarantee you during his confirmation hearing, when questions are brought up about what his intentions are or who might be prosecuted, he will defend himself in part by saying, Sometimes the FBI violates its own procedures, comes right up against two, or maybe crosses over legal barriers. I discovered that. I revealed that. I was denounced for that. I was criticized for it. So I know what it's like to be in this particular place. That will also be part of the confirmation conversation. How persuasive or unpersuasive it will be with Senate Democrats and Senate Republicans, that's for them to decide. But it will be part of that conversation.
And that's part of what makes Patel such an interesting candidate for this job, because he has both said that if he becomes the director of the FBI, he would shut down the FBI headquarters and make it a museum to the deep state. I think that was his actual quote.
Yep.
And that he has criticized how political he believes the FBI has become. But then he's also made allusions to wanting to use the FBI's power to prosecute enemies of Donald Trump. Do we have a sense then of how he would move forward as FBI director?
We don't. And that's what the confirmation process and all these meetings with senators is really going to be about. Because on the one hand, Kash Patel has identified a problem within the FBI on one investigation, and he blamed that on senior FBI leadership. Okay, you can replace senior FBI leadership. That doesn't mean you have to close down the whole building. That doesn't mean you have to move it to the middle of the country. That means you can remedy it by replacing people who violated FBI procedure and possibly the law, even though no prosecutions arose from that Inspector General investigation. You can also say the country ought to learn from those mistakes and not repeat them in a different partisan context when someone has the power to do so. If Kash Patel were to say things like that, I think his confirmation process would become smoother, not more difficult, but that's going to be up for him to discuss in open confirmation hearings for this job.
All right. Major Garrett, thank you so much.
Sure.
So again, to summarize, the breaking news that we have at this moment is that the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, who was appointed by then-President Donald Trump to serve a 10-year term, has decided that he will, in fact, resign early and not try to fight his way to continue to remain the director of the FBI after President-elect Trump has announced that he, in fact, intends to relieve him of duty. We know from what he has said that Christopher Wray will, quote, serve until the end of the current administration in January and then step down. We'll continue to monitor all of the different aspects of this breaking news, as well as many other headlines. We're going to take a short break now. Stay with us. I'm Lana Zak, and you're watching CBS News 24/7.